The strangest thing about silence is that it remembers what people forget. Not your achievements, not your titles, not even your loudest victories, but the quiet moments when you chose to show up for someone who didn't even know how to thank you. And tonight, I want you to sit with that for a second, because there are rooms you left behind where your absence still has a shape. There are people who moved on with their lives. Yes, but something in them never quite found a replacement for what you carried into their world. You were not just present, you were necessary. And whether they ever said it or not, you were the best person in many people's lives. Now I know that truth doesn't always feel like a reward. Sometimes it feels like a wound, because if you were so valuable, why did they let you go? If you were so good, why did they treat you like you were replaceable? And this is where the heart begins to wrestle with itself, because the same soul that gave so freely is the one that now questions its own worth. But listen carefully. God never measures your value by how people respond to you. He measures it by what He placed inside of you. And what He placed inside of you was never common. You were the one who stayed when others disappeared. You were the one who listened when everyone else was too distracted. You were the one who carried emotional weight that wasn't even yours, just so someone else could breathe a little easier. You didn't do it for applause. You didn't do it to build a reputation. There was something in you, something God-given, that refused to let people drown while you stood on the shore. That kind of heart is rare. That kind of presence is not easily replaced. But here is the part that many people don't understand, and maybe you'll go fefo pruda that kintendi rare. He's not all food. Being the best person in someone's life does not mean you will be the most appreciated. It does not guarantee loyalty. It does not guarantee permanence, because people don't always know how to handle what is good for them. Sometimes they are too wounded, too distracted, too immature to recognize the gift when it's right in front of them. And instead of embracing it, they mishandle it. They take it for granted. They treat it casually. And that doesn't diminish what you were. It reveals where they were. God sees the difference. There were nights you went to sleep emotionally exhausted, not because of what you lacked, but because of how much you gave. There were moments you poured strength into others while silently running on empty yourself. And nobody noticed. Nobody paused long enough to ask how you were really doing. But God noticed. Every sacrifice that went unseen by human eyes was recorded by a divine witness who never misses a detail. You thought you were just being kind. You thought you were just doing what felt right. But what you didn't realize is that God was using you as an answer in people's lives. You were the comfort they prayed for. You were the understanding they couldn't find anywhere else. You were the peace that entered their chaos without making noise about it. And even if they never put your name in their gratitude, heaven did not overlook it. So don't rewrite your story just because people failed to honor your role in it. You were not too much. You were not too available. You were not too caring. You were aligned with a nature that reflects something divine. And when that kind of spirit enters broken environments, it often gets misunderstood. Because not everyone has the capacity to recognize purity when there's no grown used to dysfunction. Let me say something that might shift how you see everything. Some people lost the best thing that ever happened to them. And they don't even know it yet. Time has a way of revealing what emotions once ignored. And one day, in a quiet moment they didn't plan for, your absence will speak louder than your presence ever did. They will remember how you made things easier. How you brought clarity when they were confused. How your presence didn't complicate their life. It steadied it. And in that realization, they will understand something they couldn't grasp before. But by then, you will not be the same person anymore. Because God does not allow a giving heart to remain in places where it is constantly drained without purpose. He will move you. He will stretch you. He will remove you from environments that cannot honor what He placed inside of you. Not as a punishment, but as a protection. You were never meant to stay where you had to beg for the bare minimum. And I know that part hurts, because your nature is to hold on. Your instinct is to fix, to heal, to restore. But God is not asking you to carry what He never assigned to you. You were called to give, yes, but not to lose yourself in the process. There is a difference between being a blessing and becoming a burden to your own soul. And some of you crossed that line without even realizing it. You gave until you felt invisible. You stayed until you felt unwanted. You tried until you felt exhausted. And God watched not with indifference, but with intention. Because sometimes He allows you to reach the end of your own strength so you can finally recognize where His boundaries begin. Not everyone deserves continuous access to a heart that was designed to reflect His love. You were the best person in many people's lives, but that does not mean you were meant to stay in all of their stories. Some chapters require your presence, but not your permanence. And that's where growth begins to feel uncomfortable, because it asks you to release what once felt meaningful. It asks you to trust that what God is doing in your life is not dependent on who chooses to stay or leave. Your identity is not built on being needed by others. It is anchored in being known by God. When that truth settles into your spirit, everything changes. You stop chasing validation. You stop over-explaining your worth. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into places that cannot hold your depth. Instead, you begin to walk differently. Not louder, not colder, but clearer. There is a quiet strength that comes when you understand that your value is not determined by how many people choose you, but by the one who created you. And God did not design you to be ordinary. He placed something in you that disrupts environments. Not through force, but through presence. You carry a kind of light that exposes what is hidden. A kind of peace that unsettles chaos. Not everyone is ready for that. Not everyone will embrace that. Some will resist it. Not because there is something wrong with you, but because there is something unhealed in them. So don't take every rejection personally. Some doors closed not because you didn't belong, but because you were too real for a space that was built on pretense. You were the best person in many people's lives, and yet you still felt alone at times. That's the paradox of a giving heart. You can be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. You can be deeply involved in someone's life and still feel like an afterthought. But hear this clearly. God is not blind to that loneliness. He understands the spaces where you felt unrecognized. And He does not leave those places empty forever. He fills them, but not always with people. Sometimes He fills them with clarity. Sometimes He fills them with peace. Sometimes He fills them with a deeper understanding of yourself that you could not access while you were constantly pouring into others. Because there is a season where God calls you back to yourself. Not in a selfish way, but in a restoring way. A season where you begin to ask questions you've avoided. Where you start to recognize patterns you once ignored. Where you finally admit that being everything for everyone left you disconnected from your own needs. And in that realization, something begins to shift. You start choosing differently. You start setting boundaries without guilt. You start recognizing that love does not require you to lose yourself to prove it's real. And that is growth. That is the moment where your giving nature becomes guided instead of scattered. Where your kindness becomes intentional instead of automatic. Where your presence becomes a gift that is offered with wisdom, not just emotion. Because God is not just shaping your heart. He is refining your discernment. You will still be kind. You will still be compassionate. You will still carry that depth that makes people feel seen. Now, you will also recognize who deserves access to it. And that changes everything. Because being the best person in someone's frame should never come at the cost of losing yourself. It should never require you to silence your truth, ignore your worth, or diminish your spirit. God did not design you to be a temporary solution in permanent cycles of dysfunction. He designed you to grow, to evolve, to walk in purpose, not just to exist as emotional support for those who refuse to grow. And I know letting go of certain people feels like losing a part of yourself. But sometimes what you're really losing is the version of you that tolerated less than what you deserve. And that is not a loss. That is a release. That is God gently removing the weight that kept you from stepping fully into who you are meant to please. So don't look back with regret. Don't question whether you gave too much. Don't rewrite your kindness as a mistake. You were who you were supposed to be in that season. You showed up with sincerity. You gave without calculation. You loved without conditions. And even if it was not returned the way you hoped, it was never wasted. Nothing given in alignment with God's nature is ever wasted. It transforms you. It strengthens you. It prepares you for spaces and people who will not just receive what you carry, but recognize it, honor it, value it, and most importantly, reciprocate it. But until then, walk forward with a different understanding. You are not here to be everything for everyone. You are here to be who God created you to be, fully, unapologetically, and without compromise. And the right people, the ones who are aligned with that truth, they will not drain you. They will not confuse you. They will not make you question your worth. They will meet you with the same depth, the same sincerity, the same respect that you have always given. Until that alignment happens, trust the process, trust the movement, trust the separation. Because sometimes the greatest evidence of God's presence in your life is not what He adds, but what He removes. And if He removed you from certain lives, it was not because you lacked value. It was because your value was too great to remain where it was not recognized. You were the best person in many people's lives. Let that truth heal you, not haunt you. Let it remind you of who you are, not make you question why others couldn't see it. Because in the end, your worth was never determined by their awareness. It was established by God long before they ever entered your life. And that will never change. And there is something else you must come to terms with. Something that doesn't announce itself loudly, but settles slowly into the soul when God begins to mature your understanding. Not everyone who needed you was assigned to keep you. That realization carries a weight to it because it forces you to separate purpose from permanence. You were sent into certain lives as a moment of clarity, not a lifetime companion. You were the interruption to their chaos, not the conclusion of their story. And while your heart may have wanted to stay, to build, to continue pouring, God knew the assignment had an ending point long before you ever became attached to it. And this is where many people struggle because they confuse impact with ownership. Just because you changed someone's life does not mean you were meant to remain in it. Just because you were good to them does not mean they were capable of being good to you in return. There are seasons where God uses you as a bridge, but you were never meant to build your home there. So when things ended, when distance grew, when communication faded, it wasn't always a failure. Sometimes it was fulfillment. Sometimes it was God saying, "You did what I asked of you there. Now come away." But your heart, your human nature, wanted to hold on past the expiration. You wanted to preserve something that God had already completed. And in doing that, you began to feel pain that was never meant to stay that long. Because when you resist divine movement, even good memories can start to feel heavy. God is not only the giver of connection, He is also the one who determines its duration. And when He decides that a chapter is complete, it is not cruelty, it is precision. There are things He is protecting you from that you cannot yet see. There are patterns He is breaking that you might have normalized. There are emotional cycles He is closing so they don't repeat in your future. And if He allowed you to remain where you were, you might have slowly lost the very essence that made you who you are. Because one of the most dangerous things for a giving heart is staying too long in a place that only knows how to take. It doesn't destroy you immediately. It happens quietly, gradually. You start to second guess your instincts. You begin to dim your light just to keep peace. You silence your needs so you don't feel like a burden. And before you realize it, you are still present, but no longer fully alive. God will not allow that to be your permanent state. He will interrupt it, even if that interruption feels like loss, even if it comes in a way that breaks your expectations. Because His priority is not your comfort, it is your wholeness. And wholeness cannot exist in environments where you are constantly required to abandon yourself. So when He pulls you away, understand this. It is not a rejection of your value. It is a restoration of it. You were the best person in many people's lives, but God is not calling you to be remembered for what you gave to others while forgetting who you are becoming within yourself. There is more to you than what you offered in those relationships. There is more depth, more purpose, more calling that has not even been revealed yet. And sometimes the only way God can introduce you to that next level of yourself is by removing you from the places where you were only known for what you could provide. Because if you stayed, you might have continued to be celebrated for your usefulness while your true identity remained undiscovered. And God will not allow your identity to be reduced to a role. Well, you are not just a helper. You are not just a supporter. You are not just the one who holds everything together. You are a soul with divine intention, crafted with layers that go far beyond what others have experienced from you. And there comes a moment where God begins to shift your focus inward, not to isolate you, but to reveal you to yourself in a way that you have never seen before. This is the season where you begin to recognize that your worth is not tied to how much you are needed. Because being needed can sometimes be a trap. It can keep you in places where you feel important but not fulfilled. It can convince you to stay in dynamics that rely on your strength but never pour back into it. And over time that imbalance becomes exhausting. God is calling you out of that cycle. He is teaching you that your value is not proven by how much you sacrifice, but by how aligned you are with His truth. And His truth is this: you are worthy of relationships that do not require you to carry everything alone. You are worthy of connections where your presence is not just utilized but honored. You are worthy of environments where your heart is not just accessed but protected. And if you have never experienced that before, it might feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable at first, because you are used to being the one who gives more. You are used to being the one who understands more. You are used to being the one who stays longer. But God is shifting that pattern. He is teaching you that balance is not selfish. It is necessary. That boundaries are not rejection. They are wisdom. That walking away is not failure. It is obedience when He has already spoken. And I know there are still moments where you think about those people. Moments where memories surface without warning. Moments where you wonder if things could have been different. And in those moments, your heart may feel pulled in two directions, between what was and what is. But listen carefully. God does not call you backward. He may allow you to remember, but He does not ask you to return. Because the version of you that existed in those spaces is not the version He's developing now. You have grown. You have seen things differently. You have understood things on a deeper level. And going back would require you to ignore that growth. It would require you to shrink again to fit into a version of yourself that no longer aligns with who you are becoming. And God will not lead you into contradiction. He leads you into expansion, into clarity, into a life where your giving nature is no longer taken for granted, but placed in the hands of those who recognize its value. So when the past tries to pull at you, don't respond with guilt. Respond with gratitude and release. Gratitude for what was learned. Gratitude for what was revealed. Gratitude for the role you played, even if it was not fully acknowledged. And then release it fully, without holding on to what no longer serves your growth. Because you cannot step into what God has prepared for you while still carrying emotional attachments to what He has already removed. Your hands must be free. Your heart must be open. Your spirit must be willing to move forward without constantly looking over its shoulder. And this is not easy. Letting go rarely is. But there is a quiet strength that begins to form when you trust God more than your own attachments. A strength that doesn't need constant reassurance. Strength that doesn't chase after what has already walked away. Strength that rests in the understanding that whatever is truly meant for you will not require you to abandon yourself to keep it. You were the best person in many people's lives, and that truth will always remain. Now God is calling you to be the best version of yourself in your own life. Not by becoming someone else, but by fully embracing who He created you to be. Without overextending, without overcompensating, without losing yourself in the process of trying to keep others. Because the life God is leading you into does not require you to beg for space in it. It makes room for you naturally. It welcomes your presence without hesitation. It reflects back the same depth that you have always given. And when you arrive there, you will understand why certain things had to end. Not with bitterness, not with regret, but with clarity. Because you will see that what God removed was never meant to carry you into your future. It was only meant to prepare you for it. And if you stay with that long enough, if you allow your spirit to sit in what God is doing, instead of rushing to explain it, you begin to notice something shifting deep within you. It's subtle at first, not loud, not dramatic, but real. You start to feel less desperate to be understood by people who never truly listened. You begin to release the need to prove your intentions to those who already decided their version of you. And in that quiet release, something sacred begins to take root. A deeper reliance on God that doesn't need constant validation from the outside. Because there comes a point where God gently removes your dependence on human acknowledgement so he can become your only reference point. And that changes how you move. You no longer measure your worth by who checks on you. You no longer feel shaken by who forgets you. You no longer feel the urge to chase clarity from people who thrive in confusion. Instead, you begin to carry a stillness, a kind of inner grounding that says, God knows, and that is enough. That place right there is not emptiness. It's alignment. And alignment doesn't always feel exciting. Sometimes it feels like solitude. Sometimes it feels like space where noise used to be. But that space is intentional. God is clearing out everything that once distracted you from hearing him clearly. Because when your life was filled with constant giving, constant fixing, constant responding, you didn't always have the room to receive. Not fully, not deeply. But now there is room. Room to hear what God is speaking over your life without interference. Room to recognize where you were overextending and why. Room to see the difference between being called and being available. And that distinction will protect you moving forward. Because not everything that reaches for you is meant to have you. Not every need is your assignment. Not every connection is your responsibility to maintain. And once that truth settles into your spirit, you stop responding out of habit and start responding out of discernment. That means sometimes you will say no even when you could help. Sometimes you will step back even when you care. Sometimes you will remain silent even when you understand exactly what someone is going through. Not because you have become indifferent, but because you have become aligned. Aligned with a God who never asked you to carry every burden you encounter. Aligned with a wisdom that recognizes that overgiving can sometimes interfere with what he is trying to teach others, because there are lessons people will never learn if you keep rescuing them. There are realities they will never face if you keep softening every consequence. And there are growth moments they will never reach if you keep standing in the place where God is, trying to meet them directly. So stepping back is not abandonment, it is trust. Trust that God can do what you cannot. Trust that his presence is not dependent on yours. Trust that what he is building in others does not require you to exhaust yourself to sustain it. And this is where your strength begins to look different. It is no longer in how much you can carry. It is in how wisely you choose what to carry. It is no longer in how long you can endure. It is in knowing when God is telling you to release. It is no longer in how deeply you can pour into others. It is in how faithfully you remain connected to the source of what you carry. Because if you disconnect from God while trying to serve people, you will eventually run dry. And what once flowed naturally will begin to feel forced. What once brought peace will begin to feel like pressure. And what once felt like purpose will begin to feel like obligation. God does not want your purpose to feel like a burden. He wants it to feel like alignment. A place where what you give is sustained by him, not drained by others. And that only happens when he becomes your priority above every relationship, every expectation, every emotional demand. So he pulls you back sometimes, not to isolate you, but to recalibrate you, to remind you that your identity is not in being needed. It is in being connected. Connected to a God who does not take from you, but fills you. Connected to a truth that does not shift based on people's opinions, but remains steady regardless of how you are perceived. Connected to a purpose that is not defined by how many people you help, but by how obedient you are to what He is asking of you. And obedience will sometimes lead you away from people you genuinely care about. Not because they're bad, not because you are better, but because the direction God is taking you requires a different level of alignment. And not everyone is willing to grow into that space with you. Some will resist it. Some will misunderstand it. Some will even take your distance personally. But you cannot allow guilt to pull you out of obedience. Because every time you choose to go back to what God has already called you out of, you delay what He is trying to build ahead of you. And what He is building is not temporary. It is not unstable. It is not dependent on inconsistent people. It is something rooted, something real, something that reflects His nature in a way that does not leave you depleted. To step into that, you must be willing to walk away from what no longer aligns, even if it once felt meaningful, even if it once felt right, even if a part of you still feels connected to it. Because God is not asking you to follow your feelings. He is asking you to follow His direction. And His direction will always lead you into a place where your spirit can breathe, where your heart can rest, where your life is not constantly revolving around maintaining connections that drain more than they give. You were the best person in many people's lives, but now God is teaching you how to be at peace in your own. Not through isolation, not through detachment, but through alignment. Through a deeper understanding that your presence is valuable, and not everyone is meant to have continuous access to it. Through a clarity that allows you to give without losing yourself, to love without abandoning your truth, to care without compromising your growth. And as you walk in that, something powerful begins to happen. You stop attracting people who only come to take. You begin to encounter those who come to build, to grow, to reflect the same depth that you carry. Not perfectly, but genuinely. And that shift is not luck. It is alignment. It is the result of choosing to honor what God placed inside of you instead of constantly offering it to those who do not recognize it. So don't rush this process. Don't try to fill every quiet moment. Don't mistake stillness for lack. God is working in ways you cannot always see. He is rearranging things behind the scenes, positioning you, preparing you, refining you, so that when the right connections enter your life, you will not meet them from a place of emptiness, but from a place of fullness. And that changes everything. Because now you are not giving to be valued. You are giving because you already know your value. You are not staying to be appreciated. You are staying where appreciation already exists. You are not holding on out of fear of losing people. You are holding on to God, trusting that whoever is meant to walk with you will do so without forcing you to shrink. And in that trust there is freedom. Freedom from overthinking every interaction. Freedom from carrying emotional weight that was never yours. Freedom from the pressure of trying to be everything for everyone. You are no longer defined by who needed you. You are defined by the God who created you. And that identity is not fragile. It does not break when people leave. It does not weaken when people misunderstand you. It does not fade when people forget what you meant to them. It remains steady, unshaken, rooted in something far deeper than human recognition. So, keep moving forward. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Not with pride, but with understanding. Not with fear, but with trust. Because the same God who used you to impact others is now guiding you into a life where your own soul is nurtured, protected, and fully alive. And when you arrive there, you will no longer look back wondering if you were enough. You will know, without hesitation, without doubt, without needing anyone else to confirm it. Because God already did. So now, after everything that has been revealed, everything that has been felt, everything that God has quietly unfolded within you, there is only one thing left to do. Stand still for a moment. Not physically, but within your spirit. And finally, accept what you have been resisting. You were never ordinary in the lives you touched. You were not just there. You were not just another person. You were the calm in someone's storm, the voice that softened their chaos, the presence that made life feel lighter even when nothing around them had changed. And whether they honored it or overlooked it does not rewrite the truth of what you carried. But hear this clearly. Your story does not end in what you meant to others. It begins in what God is now doing within you. Because this entire journey, every connection, every disappointment, every moment of being overlooked, it was not meant to leave you empty. It was meant to awaken you, to bring you to this exact place where you no longer question your worth based on who stayed, or who left, or who failed to recognize you. You see it now, not with emotion alone, but with clarity. God was never trying to prove your value to others. He was revealing it to you. And now that you see it, you cannot go back to doubting it. You cannot return to shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that cannot hold your depth. You cannot keep pouring into places where your presence is treated like an option instead of a term. That version of you has already ended. And what stands here now is someone more aware, more grounded, more aligned with God than ever before. Someone who understands that being the best in someone else's life means nothing if you are absent in your own. Someone who no longer confuses being needed with being valued. Someone who no longer chases connections that require constant self-abandonment to survive. And that shift is sacred. Because now when you walk forward, you are not carrying the same desperation to be understood. You are carrying peace. Quiet, steady peace that comes from knowing God sees you fully, without misunderstanding, without distortion, without condition. And that is enough, more than enough. So, let the past rest. Not with bitterness, but with release.